in April for an event that it's there, so it kind of is going into a new stage. My work is also extremely experimental, and I collaborate a lot with artists, sound designers, with theater artists, and choreographers. And I'm very interested in evoking the sensory experience and creating environments where it creates that curiosity in the audience. And I want the audience to immerse themselves, be able to look around at different parts, engage with different parts, and kind of think about the surroundings in a different way. Which brings me to the Institute for Interanimation and the base of that. So the past couple of years I've been collaborating with Peter Buzigal, a sound artist who's now at Emily Carr University. And we were very curious about the ways that new media reframes what it means to be live. So the word live here, as you can see on the slide, had that double meaning of, is it to be alive or to be performing live? Which, today's media technologies, from wearable technologies, from the immersive media, surveillance media, and the new system, the sensing systems, they all have this double meaning. There are in between, like to be alive or to be performing or live. They kind of urge us to reconsider both of the meanings of liveness. So, and I'm also being very interested in the media installations. I think they're very in-depth at exploring the intersections, the overlaps between these modes of liveness. So that we can combine the technological perspective of these type of media, from AI, virtual reality, immersive media, and the augmented interfaces, and the collective, the cultural perspective of poetics, play, the collectiveness that happens around the world. So I'm very interested in that kind of that tension. So one of the things about your media installations that is also very useful is that the body and technology is kind of mediating in between, and you can think about the relationship of time and space in a different way as your body, especially with immersive media, your body navigates through space and time in a different form, and in kind of like the very perceptual ambiguity. So we founded with Peter this fictitious institute called the Institute for Interanimation to explore these concepts within like the art forms and large-scale spaces and interactive installations, basically. To think about liveness within this interdisciplinary spaces, and using various media from visual, oral, sensory feedback, and sometimes even haptic. And the idea of interanimation became very prominent in our work, and that is like that mutual animation between that. It was a guide for us throughout this process, but the interanimation was in a sense like when multiple bodies are switching, changing together, they're impacting each other. It can be human bodies, technological bodies, or virtual bodies. So we think of interanimation framework as a useful way to discuss the relationship between people and the technologies that we create and use, because as we create the technologies, we are changing, and as we change, those technologies kind of alter and transform as well. So it's all about that, the mutual animation that we think navigates that unpredictable shifting threshold that we have between part real and virtual. And when those modes of liveness overlap, also we found interanimation helping us a lot and kind of guide us through this process of this project that we did. We founded the Institute for Animation to foreground this change to embrace the mutual animation between the performer and the audience, the user, the interface, and the virtual and human, and the live that we mentioned. As it's sometimes as technologists or as artists, it's kind of hard for us to explore the potentials of the digital technology without getting into instrumentalized or simultaneously kind of being instrumentalized in this spectacle in Silicon Valley. So the Institute of Interanimation, or II, for us was an attempt to play with this tension and to build work that's between technophilia and technophobia. We wanted to engage and have a dialogue with people who come into this process, and the picture you see is the phase 3, which was actually our first collaborative installation, a hybrid installation that was immersive. And the way it worked is it was designed in this black box theater in University of Virginia. There were 9 modules that were placed in this bigger space. I have a little video that would give you a better sense of how the space was designed. But there were 9 modules, and each module had a particular audio, visual, and sculptural look and feel to it. And they were all of these modules were combining live streaming media, responsive visual, and musical systems, virtual realities, and also physical interfaces. And all of it had to have the audience interaction. It wouldn't, work in a way without that kind of interconnected feedback of the audience. The modules were also live, all of them. Some of them were live in the sense that they were autonomous. They were doing their own things, whether it's audio, whether it's visual, or whether it's movement. And some of them were live that the audience had to trigger and turn it on in a way, or get it to work and impact it. So all of these modules and the whole piece together had this state of interanimation, because the modules either were reacting to each other or they were reacting to the audience. And at any time when the audience came in and did something or interacted with the piece, their impact would be left on this environment. So no single moment would be exactly the same, because it's completely moving and revolving and changing. The audience was therefore very, very integral to the piece, and they brought the system to life. There was also no roadmap, we had no particular way A to Z that we wanted the audience to interact with this piece. They could interact the way they wanted. There was no way we or they could replicate the system, because by the time you leave your imprint into the system, it would just be part of this audiovisual sensorial experience. And all we did was create a set of possibilities and let the whole thing to be triggered by the audience and by each other through the modules. And this is what I'm super interested in the VR experience. Rather than having predictable outcomes, to create these set of possibilities and allow for the audience or the viewer to kind of figure out what they want to do with their curiosity in this space. So an example of one of the pieces that was in the space is this virtual reality pod, we call it, but it was basically expandable foam. It's a large, kind of very organically looking shaped cone that was suspended from the ceiling, and you could go and adjust the height of it, and underneath you would have the goggles and then you would see a 360 view, a recording of the environment without, I'm going to play it as it plays. Oops, I really didn't need to go to YouTube, but that's okay. There you go. So I'm going to go to, so this was a 360 when you went to the, when you went to this cone-shaped virtual reality pod, you would see a recording by a dance artist and a movement artist in this space who would engage with the pieces at a different time. So you can see how she would come close, she would interact with the pieces, and the sound is similar but different, shifted from what you were hearing outside, and as soon as you go inside of it. Then I'm going to be the navigator, but probably not do a very good job. But she would and then they would come out of it, they were very disoriented because you were in this space, moving around, seeing different things, and all of a sudden, you know, either she's very close to you or you come out and then there's lots of people around you. And also the other thing about it, let me go back. Oh, I wonder if I can actually go back. Let me kill the audio. There you go, okay. But the other thing about it was the sound. As you went inside the pod, your sound would be recorded and also live streamed within a lag inside in the space and permeate in the overall sound of the space. So a lot of times, as you know, they went in and they would say something that the audience member, then when they come out, they would hear their sound, you know, permeating in the space in that sense. And that was very unsettling sometimes for them, but that would stay throughout the day. Sometimes that sound bite would just repeat itself. So if you come back after 2 hours, you might still hear your voice. Oops. Well, in the back, okay. Let's see. Okay, perfect. So when the audience entered the environment at the phase 3, they encountered this ongoing state of performance and animation. They had to perform sometimes willingly and sometimes really by accident, by pushing something or bumping into something or moving near something that had a sensor and would trigger something across the street or across the room. They were very encouraged to collaborate and collectively record parts of the environment as well. We have created these recording devices like just phones and iPads, but there were objects with fur and other materials that I'll show you a little bit of in that video. And they were encouraged to film also their encounters in this space. And what they were recording would also be streamed online and also at a control panel inside of the room where all of the views of the attendees or the audience members or performers can be viewable. So they left an imprint, they would record it from their perspective, and also they exercise kind of control over the system by recording it, by knowing what they want to do with it, by leaving that imprint. And then on the other hand, the system encouraged particular behaviors and type of performances. So, and also in kind of alluding to the surveillance culture in our contemporary life, there were some multiple cameras in the environment that at any particular time they were capturing the audience interactions in this space, and live they would be projecting it in different parts of the environment. So as a performer, you were also always on camera, and sometimes you didn't even know where that image is, but you were there. So by engaging in the system, the audience kind of positioned themselves within the frame of the video surveillance. And this was kind of reinforced with our generated language and the system that we use for data sharing online as well. Being in the black box theater also was really worked with our environment very well, because it allowed us to create an environment completely separate from the outside world. So as soon as you entered in this space, you were very much like outside of your regular environment. And we also chose, as you might have seen in some of the video footage that you noticed, we use very particular textures and materials for things that are not very, you would not think of them as typical techno-fetishistic materials. Expanding foam, plexiglass. Most of the objects were very interfaces, bendable screens, squishy objects, things that had kind of like a tactile experience to them. When the audience came in, generally we had a lot of different reactions, and this was up for a period of time, so people could come in and go. And some were extremely timid in the beginning, and they wanted to either walk together and figure things out, or they would just stay and want to watch, because somehow it was kind of it maybe a little bit like confusing. But then even young adults or the kids who came in, they were completely at ease with the piece. They wanted to see themselves in different screening and video screening pieces. They wanted to hear the sound. They were very delighted to hear their audio being looped or being echoed. And realizing even that they were part of the piece made them very excited. But generally, even though it was kind of playful and sinister, the piece was definitely not easy. And the guests, some of them wanted to know from the beginning, okay, what is going on? Tell me what it is, and then I'll go look at all the pieces and interact with them. Or afterwards, they wanted to exactly know what's happening rather than themselves engaging with that piece, which is, again, it's very interesting when we are designing these type of experiences to think about what would the reaction of the audience, or what are what do they want to do to engage with it. We didn't have very well-defined goals in the beginning of this project. We had trajectories. That's how we went with this process. Theoretically, we wanted to think about liveness in a different way. And also we wanted to, we were very interested in value systems and technical systems. Like how in the arts, especially in open-ended processes like these, how can we contribute alternate methodologies to digital system design? Perhaps ones that are not about efficiency, perhaps ones that are not about productivity, but also about the creative process. Over the course of the project, we discussed this type of these, especially about efficient interfacing a lot. Efficiency requires that we have a very set goal, and also it requires that we limit the range of possibilities or outcomes so that we would get where we want to go, to produce that satisfactory outcome that we want. And you can always be more efficient, you can keep things in order and under control, but efficiency not only predicts, only creates that predictable outcome. And the other thing that it produces also predictable users. And that's not what we wanted. So with the Institute, we really wanted to have that experimental, unpredictable, and different types of creative process. Pedagogically, as faculty members, we both wanted to make sure that we create this experience where we can engage the students to come in and think about the affordances and approaches and be part of the collective. We also wanted to engage the artists, the community artists that are out there. So we actually had about 2 or 3 of our community artists who came in and were active collaborators on the project. And we designed 2 courses separately, sound and visuals, and we had actually a couple of students from those courses that later joined us for the immersive space. This was also an exercise in collective dynamics for us. We started with this very utopian idea of we're gonna apply horizontal collectivity, we're gonna listen, like have every idea would be equally represented, and we realized that no, at some point we needed to do centrally curated processes, and that was because of economic and also deadlines and practical consideration in being in a research university. So this was disappointing and revealing for us, but it's part of the process. Like you can, even if you have a fictitious institute, at the end of the day you become like kind of those internalized institutional pressure are part of it. So that was one of the findings for us. We wanted from the early, this is as part of the promo and the cards that we, in the verbiage that we had to invite the audience, but from the very beginning of the project, we wanted to play with the permeance of traditional academic structures and also the language of Silicon Valley companies. So what we did was, rather than writing our mission statement for the Institute or any of the promo material or even the members of the Institute, their bios or information, we used a generative algorithm to produce the whole mission statement for us. So we borrowed 8 actually mission statements from actual Institute and we gave it to the algorithm to burst this out. So it kind of, it was a kind of a surprise for us too, but this interplay with that structure, the practices of contemporary institutions and the techno-idealist cultures was throughout our promotional process. And this offered us an opportunity to examine some of the institutional structures that we were trying to actually kind of look at. But it also created some unexpected outcomes for us in that the audience who received these prior to the event had no idea what's going on. And they were so confused about what is this event and what is there was nothing about this marketing language that was actually useful for them. We were too. So we understood this as more of a critique to the institutional structures that we were referring to, but people read it in many different ways. So it was kind of the institute, before it even was created this environment, it kind of lost its identity whatsoever the week before that. These are some of the other, every collaborator in the institute, we created a generated text for their biographies and demos. And we gave ourselves the title of Directors for the Institute, and our collaborators were part of the community and the community artists. We had 5 core students and 2 or 3 artists from the community who helped us. And they all brought very different backgrounds. They were helping with constructing these physical elements, soldering, coding digital elements, all of those things. So everyone came from many different backgrounds, and we all kind of learned about how our arts processes are and how interfacing within these artistic perspectives work, which was quite a challenge, but also quite interesting. So what we learned and the challenges we faced, the main thing was that interdisciplinarity is a very deeply buzzword in everywhere, especially within research institutions. And the Institute of Interanimation attempted to take on the challenge of unpacking this. And our questions were, does the academic discourse around interdisciplinarity refer to media output? Does it refer to hybrid processes? Does it refer to collective authorship? Does it refer to a bit of everything? That's what we wanted to kind of maybe figure out as part of this process. And we set out with this nebulous overarching goal of doing things differently, especially with respect to large-scale environments and how you can manage or plan for these. We try to have to work through ethics of the frame. We used and employed progressive labor practices. We actually paid all our artists that were very involved. We tried to, again, as I said, horizontal kind of process for the works and the projects that went in. But at the end of the day, from a creative and generative standpoint, this kind of the diffractive nature of the project led to more work and provided a rich canvas for thinking through liveness in a variety of different ways, but it was extremely inefficient too. So from an institutional standpoint, it would be also difficult to argue that we actually were able to subvert or reveal any oppressive structures that we tried to disturb. But the framework was also not very easy for doing performance, for doing theater, for doing art installations, and we, it depends on how we look at it. But it was a very experimental experience in that sense. So I'm going to show you guys this video, which, here we go, which hopefully gives you a sense of how the environment worked. going up, like, you know, the bird's eye view and then coming back into the space. The squishy objects, they all had audio or visual entity to them, but the goal was to really let the performers or attendees to be rough with these objects, to interact with them, to create music. And we had musicians that would come in and would very much be interested in creating, you know, a soundscape. Some wanted to figure out, but this was a sensor that would be triggered by that sculpture that's hanging. So that took a while for the audience to figure it out, or they would just stand in front of it and think there's a sensor. And as you can see, people got, first they were, and a lot of people even throughout, this is the one that I was mentioning by non people would, and the sound would also change in this space as you would do this. Like if you zoom in and zoom out, the whole soundscape would change, and that's where everyone's view people are very uncomfortable touching art, and that was one of the things that we wanted to, and that's the whole fur and the other things. But even so, many people will come and ask, like, is it okay if I touch this, or, you know, can I be rough with it? But then afterwards, when they realize that they can be, then, you know, they were hanging from some of the pieces, which was kind of fun to watch and see how people. The other thing that was interesting was what roadmaps people choose in exploring this space to think about. And these are issues that I think when you're, for a good VR, truly VR experience, we should be thinking about that it's not a very predictable, prescribed way. What we are doing now is to think about and doing different parts of this project as just VR experiences where you can interact, like there would be a physical space that you would go in, but then you can interact with the digital aspects of it rather than physical in that space, and to turn this into a VR experience in that sense. So, perfect. So, I think I'm going to stop in a couple of minutes. But as part of, I mean, doing 360 film and exploring and reflecting on what VR can do for performance and for film. And this is another project that, I mean, we've shot it and it's like in post-production right now, but it was in collaboration with costume designers, sound artists, and movement artists. And it's about this post-apocalyptic space where these creatures that we call beasts show up, and I have a couple of pictures to show you. And working in this space, in the 360 space, brings a lot of other challenges, especially if someone comes from that screen-based film and having the interface to enter a piece from storytelling or experiential experience. So that kind of is a shift that is quite interesting. There's no editing involved, obviously, in terms of the things that you consider when you film for 2D film, and there's no the cuts changing time, or there is you can't even hide things, so you have to have everything there and like set the like a very theatrical way set the stage and think about blocking. So those are some of the interesting challenges that of thinking of this space when it comes to performance and storytelling. These are some of the shots of different scenarios that happen in the story, and how the beasts kind of find themselves, and then they realize the camera and how they interact with that. But one of the other challenges with this type of VR experiences or 360 film that I find very interesting and at the same time challenging is the context that the viewer kind of experiences these pieces. In the past, like when you have a gallery, you have a festival, like a screening set, you know, your viewer and the person who's experiencing it goes there with that mindset. And now, like, depending on what you're actually presenting, what kind of context you're trying to present, they might be on their couch in their garage and watching this. So how can we talk about very sensitive issues in like, you know, what do? We did another project about the Syrian refugee crisis, and those are some of the, you know, challenges of like, if it's available to everyone, which is great, democratizing and access, perfect, but it's also how can you talk about particular subjects that require you to be in a state and, you know, be receptive to it than, you know, just having it any time and any place. So I'm going to stop there. I have a couple more stuff, but I'm going to stop so that we have a little bit of time. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. Thank you. Stop right there.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
I just have a question. So, thanks. Hi. Life is a big topic, and it seems like at the same time it's easy to underestimate and overestimate. Underestimate in the sense that it's a complete mystery and none of us know what makes it go. And on the other hand, overestimate and say, no, we attribute so many things, we attribute a sense of life because we want to.
You mean liveness, right?
It's not really there. And so, yeah, we overestimate and underestimate at the same time, but neither one of these scenarios are really satisfying. Right?
Yeah.
So how do you sort that out in your projects? Because it seems like you're pointing in that area, but I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Yeah. So for us, that idea of liveness is mostly, the first thing is about that performance in the space, like being in the space and what you do, being, you know, you're live in this space and you're doing something, you're making something, the same way down there devices, for instance, you know, you're constantly there taking photos, being online, right? And that type of liveness, and especially with music and the visual state, you need to be, like, how does that work when you record it and you present it, whereas where you are in this space with someone else making it. So I guess the way that we looked at liveness, or we were able to achieve it in this space, was the collectiveness of how being live together in the space and doing things would, and that kind of interaction and that kind of collectivity was producing this media that was being produced, and this environment that was being produced. And then the idea of just being, what does it mean to be alive? To be in this space at that moment, or if you're not there, are you part of this space? Like, those are basically, I think, that I guess we were kind of thinking, but mostly on the second part, being live, being presented, being part of this performance throughout. I think I can see your point that the first one was not necessarily part of the piece as much, or didn't recognize it, that didn't make itself into that piece towards the end. And that's part of the collective process. Like a lot of, like, you know, we had some, when you have a collective process, you just need to see how that kind of, that's a very interesting process by itself, because you don't even know how the end the project is going to be, how this environment is going to be looking for. And we were totally open to those possibilities and working with our collaborators and see, and that's how we end up at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have any ideas about that, the liveness of being alive there?
Well,
to be able to incorporate it?
I guess in a theater situation, sometimes you feel it and sometimes you don't. Sometimes,
that's true.
And it's very fragile.
Yeah.
It has to do with not only, it has to do with drama oftentimes, with how we experience transformations and how we share the experience of transformation.
That is so totally
And I'm not sure if in your setup the sense of transformation is where do you locate that? I think it's going to happen when somebody puts on a cone head.
Yes.
And there's a definite moment of transformation there. So I can see that.
Yeah.
Would there be aura bubbles inside the cone?
Yes. Yeah. That's what, like, so you could go inside and that would be set on your face.
Yeah, so I can see that working very well. And
Yeah.
some other displays, I wasn't quite sure of the transformation.
Right.
But that idea of making the art devices are generally masks, and they should be made to look like that more.
Right.
So I love that a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
So sort of to jump off of that. I work in immersive theater,
Yeah.
and I am trying to put on a show that, this requires a little explanation, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
And a big part of what I'm trying to do is like get the audience to be actors, right? Or like performers in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that is putting them in situations that demand their investigation, like the thing that you have set up here. But I think maybe the thing, and something I'm sort of struggling with, is I think narrative oftentimes provides a lot of that transformation that you're talking about. But like, how do you give the audience options or like pathways to change a narrative
Right.
in an experience?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I haven't quite figured out.
Right.
And I'm very interested in how we can use technology to provide those pathways, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very, immersive theater is actually where I kind of started this journey of thinking about space and environments that are larger and interactive and have different components. One thing we did with the collective that I'm part of that's in Dallas, we have like a very multiple different types of warehouses, but like large 30,000 square feet warehouses. And the narrative there was for all the 3 productions that were related to each other, there was a narrative. There was this linear format that was presented in a non-linear fashion, which meant like for the first production, we had the audience come in and then they would move with the performers and the performers would interact with them, right? And then they would go through the process, but not in a static place or things are not happening in front of you. You actually have to move around the space. With the second one, the audience could come in and choose which room or which space they want to go into, and then towards the end come together towards an area. And that, you need to create that with the dialogue you write, with the sound, with videos, and so it's a very interesting challenge. Not necessarily always comes out successful.
Right.
It's interesting, but I'm not sure when you leave it. It's an experience you had, which we can argue that is really, that's it. That's great. But in terms of like, did you really understand the story? Did you really get to see what the story was about? So those are some of the big challenges in immersive theater. But I think it also creates opportunities for a little bit of exploration outside the narrative structures,
right,
and allowing for you as a viewer, perhaps in this one, which was more art, is like interactive environment than a traditional theater or storytelling, that allows for the audience to bring their interest and in their background in there, and they leave perhaps more satisfied because they were able to do that. Like one of the pieces that we had, there were these piano strings that were hung from above, to like many of them, like 12 of them, and you could pick them and you can make music with that, and then that would trigger videos and trigger other things. Well, we had a musician who came in and just found a rod and started playing, with that space for like 20 minutes or so. And those moments are very special, I think, when someone finds a different interface that they're not familiar, but then they're bringing something to that piece, and because of that, also the piece becomes something else. So I'm very interested to hear about your immersive experience. Yeah, either one. Please.
Coming from education, I'm thinking about the kinds of feedback that you got from your audience about what they got out of the experience.
I'm happy to share that with you because we actually had a lot of written feedback that was given to us there. And we also, what we're watching, how the movement was going. As I was sharing earlier, we had a mixed reaction in that some found it very difficult and very confusing in terms of how they interact with the pieces, mostly because you're not supposed to touch art, you're not supposed to do these things with devices, and that was confusing. But a lot of them felt like, I was removed from my state, mental state, physical space, and I was in a different space. And that to them was very transformative. And the fact that, now I needed to figure out, be curious about things and watch other people and see what they're doing. They found that very valuable. We got that a lot from some of the comments we got and the feedback they wrote. So if they spent, one of the things that I noticed is if they came in and they actually stayed for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that first initial thing, and they kind of went over and felt comfortable, then they might have stayed. Some of them will come back. But if you come in and then you're all of a sudden, oh, this is just very different. This is totally outside my comfort zone, or it's just like it's confusing and I don't even want to deal with it because I don't see anybody in it. Then there was no point of interaction other than I'm just going to observe and I'm going to leave, right? So, and that I think one of the challenges with installation art in general. Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing this. It's really interesting to see at sort of a bigger scale. I have a question about, you had so many interesting elements in there because you had theater, you had narrative, you had sculpture, you had performance, almost like a little bit of happening. A lot of things were going on. So,
Mishmash.
yeah, I mean, it was good to see this collage, but I'm curious, you, like as an artist, as a designer, like which of those are sort of the main things that you feel are critical to the piece? And kind of in a similar question, you set it up, I don't know if some of it was logistical, to have this kind of, it's in a black box, it's like kind of feel like you're entering the space. If technology obstacles weren't there, is this something you might encounter in public or at large or kind of serendipitously? Or is that, I'm just trying to understand the process of what you're trying to get at.
Very good question. So building this took us a month and night and day in the space. Like we would go teach our classes, come back, and our collective and the main collaborators you saw are just a fraction of the people. Like we had a lighting designer who had to come in, like the movement artist was to come in and play with this. So we had we had a grant that supported us, so we were able to fund people. It went like through a process of working with the group for about a 9 months period before we actually got into the space and had access to that space. There is no way like any of these pieces, we've been showing the cone, the small interfaces here and there, but it's very difficult to even take them somewhere else. They're very site specific. So many of the pieces were realized because of the location. So there are a lot of challenges about just taking something and being able to create this type of stuff. But your first question about which one's more important, I really can't say.
I'm not saying choose one, choosing your favorite,
I think with this one I realized, and just doing, especially working with collaborators from across the fields, it allows you to realize how every piece matters so much. Like I used to make my own sound for my videos and for my pieces, and now I realize that wow, actually working with a sound designer, just the way they can transform the space is very different than just creating like soundscape or something. Same with spatial design and the tactile format. So every single piece I thought became very interesting and very challenging to also achieve. It's much easier to work in your discipline and have people that speak your language, they have the same priorities, they have, rather than everyone wants to think about their, but really transformative for, I think, us as the founder of the project. Thank you.
I just have a quick question about the notion of interactivity and engagement in the work, and I'm curious about how you think it functions differently within this work than, say, interaction with a traditional sculpture or painting where there's this kind of back and forth between your own subjectivity and what the work is saying. And so I was curious about that.
That's actually good. I would love to hear your take on it. I think with this type of work, it requires that triggering, right? You need to do something for the piece to respond to you in many cases. And you need to continue doing that if you want to understand the piece even. You can't just like walk, you can just see it and figure it, like just look at it the way that you look at the paint or sculpture. But for this type of work to realize themselves and for you to become a core performer with the piece, you have to do it. So I think the interaction is that really direct impact and imprints that you leave onto the piece that with the painting or sculpture we don't do that. We mostly take it. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.